So Candace will be staying here on stage, and now we'll be taking the investor position, right? So there'll be a conversation now about investing in space tech and dual solutions. So what does this mean for investors? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And I'm not going to talk too much more about it because we have the experts right here. I'd like to welcome onto the stage our moderator, Stefan Haubner from Apex Ventures, and two more panelists, Kuan Goertz from HT Gründerfonds, apologies, and Sebastian Straub from Sunfish Partners. Please welcome them onto the stage.
Do we need to? Yeah, no, don't need to turn it on. Hi. Hi. Yeah, Candace, first of all, thank you very much. It was quite an impressive presentation, and I think the audience already got a good overview of what the possibilities and the chances in space actually are. Just quickly for the audience, my name is Stefan Haubner. I'm a general partner at Apex Ventures. We do quite some investments in the space, I would say, sector as well. Overall deep tech investor, but I would also need to say in the beginning, I'm also personally investing a lot into defense technologies, dual use and single use, which is also a topic we'll cover today. And me and my very distinguished guests will talk today a little bit about the ecosystem of space investments. We'll talk about the situation in Europe and maybe a little bit about the impact of the current US election that topic has on space investments and defense investments. And of course, we're going to talk about what's important for us as investors to understand and acknowledge when it comes to investing in that space. And maybe I'd like to start with Cohen actually, because we had a preparation, of course, for this discussion, and something that you said in the preparation of the discussion, I think somehow stuck with me, and it was that you said there's kind of a lack of understanding how much we actually depend on space assets and how fragile this whole ecosystem is. So maybe we can start with that topic, and you can shine some light on that.
Yeah, very happy. I'm very happy to be here. Perhaps the example that I used is that most people are aware that we're using satellites for example, weather forecasting to know if it's raining tomorrow, if the sun is shining. Of course, we're using GPS or even better Galileo from Europe for navigation. But what few people know is, for example, one of the most widely used applications of GNSS, so global navigation systems, is the timing information. Any financial transaction, we're talking about investments today, requires a very accurate timing information that is provided by global satellite constellations because they're providing the best and most accurate timing information globally. And I think that is one of the most, let's say, easiest examples where few people realize that. Perhaps the part on how critical these assets are, I guess we'll explore that a bit in follow-on questions.
Yeah, I mean, you feel free to further explore this as far as you want to go. But I think what's really interesting is, and I think Candace, you gave a very good overview of what are all of the possibilities that we have actually in space. And I think, given your background, and especially I think you mentioned your father's background as well, which is very interesting, that space back in the days was mainly seen as more of a battlefield, and it shouldn't be used as a battlefield. It should also be used for civilian purposes. So I think it would be interesting from your perspective as well, how this has developed over the last, I would say, decades. I mean, there was a space race, let's call it, in the 60s around that time. What's your experience? How has this developed over the decades?
Well, it really has been this pendulum that I was talking about. Because, first we had the space race to the moon, and it was against the Russians. Then we had we actually had also Star Wars with satellite television. When I was doing SES at the beginning, the European Space Agency had other types of satellites, and they were saying that my satellite wasn't good and their satellite was, and of course I won. and so we were also fighting against cables. And then we of course we had mobile, and mobile technologies, and everybody said, oh, everything is, forget cable, forget fiber, it's going to be mobile. Well, actually, it's all of the above, and particularly space right now with Iridium, with OneWeb, with Starlink, with Kuiper. We are working very closely with the mobile communications as well. And all of the internet, I did the world's first broadband internet satellite service in 1997. And, and of course, this encompasses everything. And so now, of course, and all of this was happening in the civilian world. And so what has happened now is that the United States government, but also I was just on the phone having a call this morning with Philippe Tibi, the founder of French Tech, and he's going to be, basically suggesting to the Europeans that they also do something like DARPA in the United States, where the Defense Department gives, procurement to innovative solutions. And hopefully that this will happen as well. And we do have to, yes, you talked about the elections. I'll just speak very briefly about that. I was not happy this morning. I'll let my true colors show. But I looked at all of the government leaders around the world, and they all were writing to Trump and saying, we will work with you to try and obtain peace. And so I think that we have to work together. I'm a daughter of a NATO general, wife of a NATO ambassador. I believe very strongly in NATO. And NATO has the largest budget they've ever had for the next 10 years. So good things should happen.
I hope so as well. And I think maybe that's a good follow-on question maybe for all of our panelists, actually. And you said it well, all of the global leaders, and I think we can discuss who in particular, but everyone reached out their hand to Trump and actually said, let's collaborate. I think a very interesting question on the initial statement of Kohn is, how much interaction will there be and how much collaboration will there be on a global level, or will we more see a development into, let's say, tinier fractions like NATO developing something for themselves, Europe developing something for themselves? Will there be more collaboration, or will there be more, I would say, isolated, let's say, interest groups that just pursue a certain path? Open question to everyone.
Maybe pick up. Yeah. I think there will be collaboration, because when we stick to the space topic, and especially the militarization of space and the military use of space, I think one good thing which Trump did back in 2016 was the launch of the Space Force. And nowadays the Space Force is recognizing that they can't deal themselves with the threat of China and Russia really now enhancing the capabilities in space, and they are forced to collaboration. So they're opening up and very proactively also approaching European governments, saying, look, we know we are pretty much advanced when it comes to the capabilities, and a lot of these capabilities are not well known, they are secret, but some of them are being now classified. More and more you see also in public and media examples like you just shared. Chinese or Russian satellites are very closely coming to European assets or US assets and basically spying on other satellites. And this is an area where the Americans want to collaborate, because they know they need to have allies and partners, and they need to have a diversified portfolio of friendly assets they can tap in and have this more extended intelligence when it comes to the space situation awareness. Plus, also another big topic is the maneuverability in space. So nowadays, what you also see, also new companies where private capital has been invested, for example, called True Anomaly, they are able to very dynamically maneuver in space. So basically, you can imagine very soon there will be satellite chases where satellites are going to chasing each other with offensive and defensive capabilities. Of course, this poses a huge risk. So just imagine some of these satellites colliding in each other. There's something called the Kepler effect. So basically all the small debris crashing into other debris, crashing into other debris. Very soon, the common good, which is space, will not be accessible for any of these fancy rockets of Elon Musk. So this is a huge risk where we need to collaborate, but the problem is since this is a common good, this is not yet quantifiable, meaning the insurers in this room need to come up with a very genius idea how to make this insurable and how to create incentives and schemes where either you punish companies to behave or you incentivize them to behave. So nowadays, there is no legal framework which is actually obliging companies to stick to certain rules. So there is collaboration needed, and the Americans, they're leading the pack.
Yep. I mean, maybe then to add on that, you said collaboration needed. Yeah, I think one thing, I think there will be, like in air travel, yeah, there will be some basic rules.
Yeah.
I think the question to the others as well, how far will this collaboration actually go? Because I think if you ultimately lead, then maybe the discussion in the direction of what does it mean for investors, who will be leading the pack when it comes to I would say the innovation and the regulation and all of those topics, because there will be the most interesting investment opportunities, most likely.
Yes, indeed. I mean, Europeans are really good in regulating stuff, right? So we are not good in invention and actually commercializing invention. We are still good, but not really commercializing, but we are world champions in regulation. So I think, as I mentioned, there is a gap in the market for insurers and also financial institutions to come up with this scheme, which would create a quantifiable global framework for making sure that we don't mess up the whole, let's say, low Earth orbits and different orbits, right? So I think if somebody comes up with a business idea how to make it work, maybe coming from an insurance company, maybe coming from different, let's say, areas with a specific expertise, I would totally invest in this company.
So, and so if I may, just one point to the other thing that we were talking about with the various working together of systems with the United States and Europe. One thing we have to work very, very carefully on is making certain that our systems are interoperable. And at the moment, unfortunately, this is not the case. And so I'm trying to lead an effort to bring the US and European governments together to make certain that our systems are interoperable. But to come to your point, when we first started North Star, we thought that our biggest clients were going to be space debris. And we tried to get the insurance companies to be our clients. And they refused to do it. And that is because, in typical insurance thinking, I hope maybe some insurance companies are here, but until something happens, they don't insure it. And so there would have to be really a big bang in every single sense of the word for them to say, okay, now we have a real possibility here of getting money, of getting more premiums. I mean, sorry, but that's the way it is. And so this is the interesting thing about dual use, because today our biggest clients for this space-based, space situational awareness, contrary to our thinking, are the governments, and it is the defense. And as a result, we are able then to use that money to do more work on the space debris. And it's the same thing with Earth observation. We have companies like ISI, where Seraphim invested in, and we originally were looking through the clouds for weather. We would do tracking of hurricanes, etc. Well, we were doing okay, but when the wars came out, all of a sudden the same system was being used to track the troops and the tanks at the nighttime under the cover of clouds. And so that is now basically helping ISI be able to extend its civilian use. And I think we will be seeing more and more of this.
Maybe just to use the ISI example in terms of the Ukrainian war or conflict, also kind of to highlight what's actually happening on the commercial side. Of course, ISI is a great example when it comes to the private investments. I think right now 400 million euros have been invested in total. But when the war started, obviously Ukraine didn't have their own satellite. And there was a financing scheme set up, basically a foundation, private foundation, has been collecting donations. And with that donations, this foundation bought actually exclusively the rights for an ISI satellite. So nowadays, the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian armed forces have exclusive access to the satellite. And I think this is just showing this dramatic shift we are now witnessing, not just on space, but also in defense.
Absolutely. I mean, Cohen.
I also think that collaboration will continue, and I think even now there is collaboration between Europe, the US, and also Russia for the International Space Station. So the space station where the astronauts are going to, staying in space, despite the war that continued. It's gotten a bit more complex, but nevertheless it has continued. I think what is key though is for, in particular Europe, we sometimes are a bit naive and think that collaborating, partnering means also sharing the same values, sharing the same principles. And that is something that some of our partners don't necessarily see the same way. And I think although partnerships will continue, we need to invest more and build stronger our own capabilities, in particular for space, because we have a critical dependency on our assets. You showed in your talk, of course, how a satellite is approaching an enemy satellite, one of our satellites. One thing is knowing it, but we can actually not do anything about it. Our satellites have
Coming next.
Okay. And that is a critical technology because there are, China has their spy satellites, as you showed. They're approaching our critical satellite, but we cannot really move them, or we can, but it comes at a cost.
No, it comes at it comes at a cost of fuel.
Exactly.
And those spy satellites, their payload is only fuel. They just
Exactly.
they just go around the orbit. But we are working on defense systems to be put on each satellite that will be able also then to defend.
And that is exactly what I mean. These are critical technologies where also we as private investors are looking into, because that is very interesting, and that is absolutely what we need in order to protect our critical assets in space.
But also on the other side, when we are talking about collaboration, obviously we are talking about collaboration from the government point of view. And we as investors, we love monopolies. And I think SpaceX is the best monopoly ever. And I just want to highlight that this company has been able to achieve these things, which they achieved by really vertically integrating everything into one company. Versus when you think about the development of a NASA rocket, you have multiple US states working on a screw on every single piece of the rocket and making like gazillions very expensive, over budget, and everything related to inefficiency, how to build large hardware development projects. And I think this is also, again, this huge shift when it comes to commercial space, but of course also to commercial defense. When you look at companies which are highly vertically integrated, they're able to rapidly iterate on the hardware cycles. And I think this will even further push the development of space technologies and defense technologies.
Absolutely. I mean, maybe to build on what was said in the last few minutes, when it comes to, it was mentioned several times, the importance of governments and the involvement of governments. And then at the same time, us being Europeans and being well aware what our, I would say, governments actually do in the space of innovation. It's more about regulation and actually innovation. I think an interesting question for the audience would be to actually say, what does it mean for investors when the government is that heavily involved in a certain field? And will there be a competition again of certain spaces where the US is less regulated, more investor opportunities, Europe more regulated, less investment opportunities? Would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I always said regulation never stopped anything good from happening. And I really believe that. If you don't like the regulation, change it. And I have done that many times. I'm a free marketeer. And I remember when the European Union was doing Galileo. And I think you're a friend of Galileo, but I am not. And so, $10 billion was spent on putting together a satellite system when $1 billion would have done it. And I had actually put together a commercial consortium to do basically what Galileo was going to do. And when I saw that the government was going to do it, I just told all of my investors, I said, forget it. I don't want, I will not lead you down this path. And I also look now at Iris Squared. Iris Squared, unfortunately, is an industrial policy project. It was brought together by Thales Alenia Space and Airbus, and I've told them this many times, so they don't, I'm not hiding it. They talked to Thierry Breton, and Thierry Breton, who did not know that much about space, said, oh yes, wonderful. Whereas increasingly what we are seeing in the United States is the Department of Defense or the Europe or the governments, they will do an RFP and they will buy services. So they will not make an RFP for a hardware. They will say, we need this, and they will go out to the commercial market. And this is what we need to do, also for procurement in everything. My friend Sherry Kutu, she wrote the Scale Up report in 2014, and it was all about procurement. We invest billions of money in startups. What we need to do here in Europe is we need to give contracts for services and goods to all of our startups across all of the sectors.
Yeah.
Cannot agree more. I'm happy with Galileo that we have our own system, that we don't depend on the US also for navigation. But I think the way how it went, and I see it the same for Iris Squared, which is a big 10 billion euro initiative from the European Commission to provide basically satellite communication services around the world. I think I share your view on it. I think they would have done better of this. Take the risk budget of the big companies, which is probably 10%, 1 billion, and sign into several startup consortia.
Yeah.
They probably get 80% of their requirements fulfilled at the same cost.
Yeah.
But I agree. So from an investor perspective, governments will always be a key customer, but it is important that they are providing contracts and buying services and not telling the startups what they need to do and how they need to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we should also break it down. Government as a customer is a very broad term. Maybe what we also can learn from the Americans again is to create new type of institutions. Obviously, we covered already DARPA, but also as a new institution in the ecosystem in the US, it's called the Defense Innovation Unit.
Yes.
Which is basically a new interface between the government, which is consisting of gazillions of different institutions, but then the other side are private investors, entrepreneurs, innovators, really trying to break in to the government, which is, again, a very complex machine. Nobody understands, even in the US, very complicated, in Europe even more. And these new type of actors are basically acting as the interface, a new stakeholder in this innovation ecosystem, which is very required because they understand totally the end customer user needs. For example, the warfighter, which needs to fight the war in trenches in Ukraine and being exposed to electromagnetic spectrum, whatever. So really kind of the harshest environment you can imagine. And this is going to be translated into contracts. Very concrete, the language we investors are speaking, entrepreneurs are understanding, and they are soliciting basically proposals. And after a period of 3 weeks, 4 weeks, then if somebody proposes something very appealing, a contract is being issued during 4 weeks and then implemented. These are new actors in the innovation ecosystem, and we should stop talking about the government as a customer, but really boiling it down, who's actually going to buy? Does this institution understand the needs from investors? Because this is, again, something what they need to be educated. When you talk to government officials, they don't understand venture. They don't understand our investment cycles. They don't understand that we need to earn money. So this is something what needs to be translated. And then, of course, they start to understand, and then they can adapt to our needs and also to the needs of the entrepreneurs who are chased by us, the investors, to de-risk the technology, the market, to hire the best people, to really understand this dynamic. And I would encourage Austria, if you're already thinking about the fund-to-fund, also to think about a new innovation institution, which is basically the interface between the end users' needs, but also us, the innovation ecosystem, I would say. And this would really streamline all the different struggles and make it more efficient.
Maybe to further develop the topic of, let's say, regulation in quotation marks, because we covered it, I think, from a company perspective and the importance of the framework for companies. Maybe to talk a little bit about a framework for investors. As I mentioned in the beginning, I'm now for over 10 years an investor in the defense ecosystem, also single-use systems. And the experience in Europe always was it's extremely difficult to do something in that space when it comes to transferring money, even getting certain licenses. I think the governments were not really used to deal with that stuff or to authorize it. And I think a very, very famous example is the European Investment Fund not allowing anything that is remotely touching, I would say, dual use, which tends to be not too much civilian space. There really seems to be a cultural issue in Europe when it comes to the topic of dual use, and I mean single use we're not even talking about. But what's the development there? Do we see that it gets any better? Where's this going?
Well, I think, first of all, for your first part of the question, I remember when I did start, when I was just the president of EBAN from 2014, I actually put in place a paper called the European Innovation Zone. And it was exactly this. It was saying, let us promote innovation. I even, had this idea that we could, my dad did the first YOSMA funds in Israel, that we could inspire European citizens to invest in innovation, and they would have a bank guarantee of up to 80% of what they had put in if it didn't reach an IRR of 27% in 5 years. So all of this is possible. And this morning here again, I was speaking, with the head of the founder of French Tech, and he was pretty much saying something like this. So I think that is one thing. It's always welcome, but you have to do. You have to absolutely do. Concerning the EIF, actually, the United States is also exactly like this. The U.S. Exim Bank will not invest in defense only. They will invest in dual use. And so will the EIF, by the way. They will also invest in dual use. And the EIB, wrote this article or this book about how to invest in space. And they put out all of the reasons and sectors where you could invest in space and make money, including, by the way, defense. So, you just can't let people tell you what to do with your money. And you have to say, okay, I want to make this happen. And you put together what you want to do, and then you just go and do it. When we started SES in 1983, it was not allowed to have a private satellite dish, much less launch a private satellite. When I started Teleport Europe in 1990, there was no way to do telecommunications via satellite. The wall had just fallen down. The companies in Eastern Europe needed to have modern telecommunications. And I just wrote the regulation for each of those countries. And I said, here, you can use this regulation. Just make it happen.
Yeah. Please.
Maybe respond to that. So with Sunfish, we are pre-seed seed funds based in Warsaw and Berlin. We invest in early stages, and I'm overseeing the military defense and space portfolio. And in our first funds, we had the Polish development funds, which is also being financed by the EF, as one of our LPs. And we started to actually formulate this thesis. This was back 2022 around dual-use technologies, and then eventually we picked a number of really interesting companies like counter-UAV technologies. And we thought, okay, so this is a nice dual-use technology, but eventually it got rejected because it was a kinetic effect. So this led me in a conclusion to a decision which I took. I privately invested in a military drone company, an offensive and kinetic system, just in order to go through this whole process of understanding how this actually is working in Europe. And indeed, there are a lot of obstacles when it comes to export licenses for military goods and even opening a bank account. It's impossible in Europe to open a bank account for a military drone company. There are ways how to do it. I know it nowadays, but 2 years ago it was almost impossible. And now coming to the question about governments. So right now you have in Europe 3 governments which are taking this topic very seriously. Obviously it's Ukraine, but you have also Poland and Estonia. And I listened today to this fund-to-fund idea of Austria, and actually Poland and Estonia are working on a defense fund-to-fund without restrictions. No dual use, bumbo jumbo, defense.
Yeah.
So they are looking into investing into funds which invest into military technology. So actually this week, SmartCap, which is the Estonian government's investment fund, gave kind of the criteria, and they said very clearly they want to invest in funds, defense funds, which can also contribute not just only to the security, sovereignty, and resilience of Estonia, but also to the development of the industry of the economy. So for them, it's really strengthening the development of the economy. It's not about security only. It's not about military only. It's about the growth engine of the small country, 1.5 million inhabitants. But they understood the model, which was basically put in motion after the Second World War in the US. DARPA invented ARPANET, which we are now using. I mean, it's like trillions of spillover effect in dollars. GPS also invented by DARPA. Spillover effects in terms of also huge amounts of money. And these are military technologies where the government consciously and smartly and strategically invested in. And countries like Estonia and Poland and Ukraine are now taking up, of course, they're investing in military technology, but there's a much more broader perspective on that, how to use it also for the growth of these countries. And again, Poland is working on a defense fund-to-fund. Estonia is working on a defense fund-to-fund. And I mean, Ukraine is obviously investing.
Maybe because I think we have a time issue slowly. Maybe to summarize, because I think our audience here is mainly investors. Maybe from each of you a quick opinion on what you think you would invest at the moment or in the upcoming, would say, 12 months or something like that. Which areas would be interesting, which regions especially from a geographical point of view, but where do you think there are interesting investment opportunities?
I can let you go
Okay,
first.
so for me personally, the whole underwater space is really fascinating. Underwater autonomous drones. This is something what I'm currently looking at. Very promising.
Interesting, yes. I'd say counter defense against swarms. I think we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg of what is possible. And in terms of space, what we just discussed, having the ability in space to actually maneuver, coping with hostile attacks for satellites. I see a lot of potential there.
I think everything having to do with space in space. So space stations, in-orbit fueling, in-orbit manufacturing, in-orbit power manufacturing, such as the space-based solar power. So everything space in space. And that's certainly where we at Seraphim are investing the majority of our money now.
Master of Ceremony says we are fine, perfectly in time,
Okay.
as it should be in, I would say, military and defense areas. Thank you very much for the participation to all of the audience, and thank you for the panelists.